For decades, people believed sending things to space was an impossible business, controlled exclusively by multi-billion-dollar governments and defense monopolies with infinite taxpayer cash. But in 2010, a single payload cost an astounding $18,000 per kilogram to reach orbit. Fast forward to today, and that price has collapsed by over 90%, plummeting below $1,500. This wasn't just a technological miracle. It was a deliberate, brutal financial execution. One company intentionally triggered a ruthless price war, engineered to bankrupt its rivals, and silently seize complete control of Earth's orbit. Now, you might think dropping prices was meant to make space accessible for everyone. Right? Wrong. Behind this shocking drop in launch costs lies a dark, predatory strategy, a financial chess move designed to lock out competition, starve legacy giants, and build an unbreakable monopoly in the skies. But how did a scrappy outsider pull off a price cut so extreme that even Lockheed and Boeing couldn't survive it? And more importantly, what hidden nightmare happens to the entire global economy once all competition is completely wiped out? By the end of this breakdown, you will uncover the terrifying mechanics of predatory pricing in outer space, the secret government money loop that keeps it alive, and why the company charging you the lowest price today is actually preparing to control the most expensive toll booth in human history. To understand how this brutal price war began, we first have to look at the massive, untouchable oligopoly that ruled the American space industry for generations. Before this price war hit, the launch market was completely dominated by two defense titans, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, who merged their space divisions to form a single powerhouse, United Launch Alliance. For years, they operated without a single competitor in sight, and when you have zero competition, you can charge whatever you want. Back then, launching a government satellite cost taxpayers anywhere from $200 million to an incredible $400 million per single flight. Why? Because the government signed what was called cost-plus contracts. Think about how insane this is under a cost-plus contract. If a rocket company spends $100 million building a rocket, the government pays them $100 million, plus an extra guaranteed 10% profit margin on top if the company makes a mistake, runs over budget, and ends up spending $300 million instead. The government pays the $300 million, and their guaranteed profit increases accordingly. It was a system designed to reward inefficiency. The more expensive the rocket, the more money the company made. Legacy executives were sitting on a goldmine, enjoying guaranteed profits with zero financial risk, until a radical new entrant entered the arena. Armed with a terrifying strategy, this new player didn't just want a piece of the pie. They wanted to destroy the entire system. They walked up to commercial satellite operators and made an offer that sounded like complete suicide, while legacy providers were charging $200 million per launch. This newcomer offered to launch the exact same payload. For just $60 million, that wasn't just a small discount. That was a brutal 70% price cut. Executed overnight? Imagine running a business where your primary product costs $200 million to make, and a new competitor suddenly sets up shop right next door selling it for $60 million. At first, industry experts laughed, claiming it was a bluff. They insisted no company could survive selling launches at such a low price without going bankrupt. But the newcomer wasn't bluffing. They were executing step one of the classic Silicon Valley monopoly playbook. And that brings us to a massive question. How on earth could they sell launches for $60 million when it cost everyone else $200 million just to build the engine? The answer lies in a hidden business model shift, extreme vertical integration. Combined with predatory cost structures, instead of buying components from thousands of expensive defense contractors, who all marked up their prices to make a profit, this new entrant decided to build 85% of the entire rocket in-house. Under one single roof, they manufactured their own engines, wrote their own software, and welded their own fuel tanks. By cutting out every single middleman, they managed to reduce the actual manufacturing cost of a rocket to a fraction of what legacy companies were spending, while United Launch Alliance was spending tens of millions buying individual valves, and flight computers. This contender was manufacturing them internally for a few $1,000s. This massive cost advantage gave them the ultimate weapon: the power to set prices so low that no legacy provider could match them without taking catastrophic losses. Commercial satellite companies started abandoning legacy providers in droves. Signing multi-launch deals with the cheap challenger, the monopoly of old space was bleeding market share. Fast, but legacy giants still had one final shield: a high-margin fortress that protected them from total collapse. That fortress was military defense contracts. For years, the U.S. Department of Defense refused to let the cheap newcomer fly sensitive spy satellites, citing safety risks and a lack of flight history. This allowed legacy giants to keep charging inflated prices to the government, offsetting their losses in the commercial market. So, what did the challenger do? They did something almost unheard of. They sued the United States Air Force. They demanded the right to compete for high-value military launches, proving that their rockets were not only cheaper, but just as reliable. When the lawsuit settled, the fortress fell, the military opened up its bidding process, and the price war officially invaded the defense sector. Suddenly, Boeing and Lockheed Martin were forced to compete on price for the very contracts that kept them alive. The result was total panic. ULA had to restructure, lay off thousands of workers, and desperately start designing a new rocket just to stay afloat. They realized that if they stayed on their old model, they would be completely driven out of existence. And just when competitors thought the price war couldn't possibly get any worse, the newcomer unleashed their ultimate weapon: reusability. Up until this point, every single rocket launched in human history was completely destroyed after one single use. It was like flying a brand new Boeing 747 from New York to London, throwing the plane into the ocean, and buying a completely new airplane for the return flight. It was pure financial waste. So, when the Challenger successfully landed their first stage booster back on Earth, refurbished it, and launched it again, the economics of space travel shifted forever. Instead of spending $50 million to build a brand new rocket for every launch, their hardware cost per flight suddenly plummeted to just the cost of fuel and refurbishment, which was a tiny fraction of the original build cost. This created a terrifying pricing trap for every other company in the world. Think about the math here. If it costs a competitor $50 million to build a rocket, they cannot charge less than $50 million without losing money on every single flight. But if your rocket is reusable, and your marginal cost per flight drops to $15 million, you can charge $30 million, make a massive profit, and still undercut your competitor by $20 million. It was a financial checkmate. Competitors were stuck in a nightmare loop. They couldn't afford to build reusable rockets without spending billions in R&D, but they couldn't raise billions in R&D because they were losing all their customers to the cheaper reusable provider. One by one, legacy players and small startup entrants began to choke. European launch providers, Russian state space agencies, and dozens of overfunded venture capital startups suddenly realized their business models were completely dead on arrival. The market was being systematically cleared, which leads to the ultimate, most chilling question of all: why would a company fight so hard, burn so much capital, and endure years of intense legal and technical battles, just to lower prices for satellite companies? Was it really out of the goodness of their heart? Was it purely for the noble goal of making humanity multiplanetary? Or was there a much bigger, far more lucrative strategy at play? Here is the hidden business strategy that almost everyone misses. Lowering launch costs was never the ultimate end goal. It was merely the stepping stone to building the ultimate monopoly. Once you control the cheapest, most reliable transport system to low Earth orbit, you can do something no other company on Earth can do. You can launch your own massive satellite network at cost price, while other satellite internet companies had to pay tens of millions of dollars to buy a ride on someone else's rocket. This launch giant was launching thousands of its own internet satellites, paying only the bare minimum internal cost of fuel and refurbishment. They used their launch dominance to flood orbit with tens of thousands of communication satellites, building a global internet service provider that generates billions of dollars in high-margin, recurring subscription revenue. Do you see the grand design now? The rocket launch business wasn't meant to be a massive profit generator on its own. It was engineered to be a massive loss leader, a brute force weapon to seize physical control of orbit and launch an entirely new, multi-trillion-dollar telecom monopoly by undercutting everyone else on launch prices. They eliminated the competition, secured a dominant market share in space transport, and used that exact same transport pipeline to dominate global satellite internet. They built the highway, they built the trucks, and now they own the delivery destinations. So, where does this leave the future of the space industry? We are now entering a deeply alarming phase. When one single player controls over 80% of all payloads launched into orbit globally, they hold absolute power over who gets access to space, and at what price. If a rival satellite company wants to launch a network that competes with theirs, who do they have to ask for a ride? The very company they are trying to compete with. They can price their competitors out of the market, delay their launch schedules, or simply prioritize their own payloads. The very price war that was supposed to democratize space has ended up creating the most powerful, most untouchable gatekeeper in modern economic history. The legacy defense giants are scrambling to merge. Governments around the world are pouring billions in subsidies into national space programs just to maintain a basic, independent entry to orbit. And venture capital firm money is drying up for traditional rocket startups. The era of cheap, Wild West competition in space launching is quietly closing. And as the last remaining competitors struggle to survive on crumbs, the winner of this price war gets to sit back, look down at planet Earth, and decide exactly how much the rest of humanity will have to pay.